In this video, we're going to demonstrate the manual dimension tools. Under your Dimension Tools parent tool, you'll find manual dimensions, end-to-end dimensions, angular dimensions, interior dimensions, point-to-point dimensions, baseline dimensions, running dimensions, centerline dimensions, and the tape measure. First, we'll select the manual dimension tool. To create a manual dimension, you simply click and drag a line where you want your dimension line to be. As you drag, the dimension tool will find each object to create an extension line to. When you create that dimension line, you'll need to be within the reach that is set in your defaults. That is discussed in a different video. If you start too far away from your objects, the tool is not able to find the objects that you want to create your extension lines to. So you must be within that reach. Once you've created your dimension line, you can then select it and move it. The end-to-end dimension tool works very much the same way, except for when you start clicking and dragging your line, it'll find the first object to dimension to. Then it'll drop that one and select the next object. It'll drop that one and select the next object. So this dimension is to dimension from one object to another. The third tool is your angular dimension tool. If you want to dimension a wall that's set at an angle, you simply select this tool, click and drag a line between that and the next item that you want to dimension to. That creates a dimension that shows you the angle that that wall is set at in relation to the wall that you're dimensioning to. The next tool in the manual dimension tools is your interior dimension tool. This tool will give you dimensions from the inside of each room. The dimensions are set to go to the framing layer of each wall. This again is set in your dimension defaults, which is discussed in a different video. The next manual dimension tool is your point-to-point dimension tool. This tool is a little bit different in that it doesn't need an object to snap to create a dimension line. If you click and drag a line away from any objects, Chief will automatically create dimension points to dimension to. You can move these points, and it will snap to objects, but it's not associated with the object. For instance, if you use your manual dimension tool, and I dimension between these two walls, this dimension is associated with that wall that I'm dimensioning to. If I delete this wall, the dimension is deleted as well. Whereas with the point-to-point dimension tool, if I dimension from this wall to this one, and then delete this wall, the dimension remains because it's dimensioning to its own dimension point. The next tool in the Dimension Tools parent tool is your baseline dimensions. Baseline dimensions will create a dimension from the start point to each object individually, and as it snaps to the next object, it creates a separate dimension line. The Running Dimension tool acts very much the same way, with the exception that each dimension is relative to the start point. So for instance, as I drag a line, each one of these dimensions is the distance from the door to the initial wall that I started at, then to the middle of the door, then to the outside of the door and the next wall. So if this 9'7" is from this wall to the start point, which is this wall here. The next tool is your centerline dimension. This dimension tool will detect the center of a window, for example, and place a centerline symbol above it. There's also the tape measure tool. The tape measure tool is different in that it doesn't actually place a permanent dimension line. It acts very much like a tape measure does. If I hold down my mouse button and drag, it will give me the dimension from one object to another. As soon as I release my mouse button, just like a tape measure, it'll snap back and the dimension line disappears. Once you've placed dimensions, you can edit them. For example, if I don't want all the dimension extension lines, I can simply click on the dimension line itself. When I do, I get diamond edit handles. These diamond edit handles allow you to remove the extension line. As an example, if I don't want the center line dimension on this window, I just want the extension lines on each side of the window, I can simply click on this diamond edit handle and drag it away from the dimension line, and it removes it. When you click on the dimension line itself, you will also get this dangling diamond edit handle. This is to allow you to add extension lines. If I click on this, drag it back to the center line of this window, it'll add an extension line right to it. You can also move the dimension line numbers individually. If these dimensions are too close together, I can simply raise the dimension numbers up a little bit so that you can see them more clearly. On this end, if I want that dimension extension line to snap to the siding rather than the framing layer, I can simply click it and drag it out and snap it to any point of that wall. Even the inside of the framing layer. Once you've placed a dimension line, you can customize it individually. If you select the dimension line and then click on your Open Object tool at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you can bring up the Dimension Line Specification dialog. In the specification dialog, we can see that our dimensions are set to use the 1/4 inch scale dimension defaults. The number height is set by default, as indicated by the D in the parentheses. You can change the number height to something different, and as you can see now my dimension numbers are smaller. If you want to change it back, you can simply type a D and hit your Tab key. That'll take it right back to the default set in the 1/4 inch scale dimension defaults. You can also choose to use rounded value indicators if you'd like. Under the primary format category, you can change the formatting of the text itself. For instance, if I uncheck the box to use the default, instead of using feet and inches as my units, I can change it to use just inches. I can also select to include leading zeros or trailing zeros in my dimensions. We'll leave this at feet and inches for now. The accuracy by default is set to use the smallest fraction of 1/16 of an inch. You can set this as small as 1/128 of an inch. You can also change the text position. By default, it's set to center on the dimension line. If you want the dimension numbers to show above the dimension line or below it, you can simply click on that button. You can also choose to add a secondary format. For instance, my primary format right now is using feet and inches. If I click on Secondary Format, uncheck Use Default Formatting, include second formatting, I can change this to millimeters, for instance. And then here I'm going to change my decimal places that'll show to 2 and click OK. As you can see, that adds a secondary line to my dimension numbers. I now have 6 foot 8 inches and 2032 millimeters. For now, we'll just use the default formatting and not the secondary formatting. You can also change extension lines. Each individual extension line is numbered. When I select my dimension line, you can see here that my extension lines are numbered. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. When I open up my specification dialog and go to my extension lines, I can change each individual extension line by unchecking the Use Default box. You can change the gap, you can change the length towards the marked object, and the length away from the marked object. And I can apply that to all of them. If I want to add a center line marker, for instance, number 5 is the center line of a window. I'm going to select extension line number 5, and then I'm going to mark as a center line. That adds the center line symbol. You can also choose to add additional text, leading text or trailing text, next to the dimensions. For instance, between 5 and 6, I'm going to add some leading text to verify in field. You can also make changes to the arrowheads. Here, I'm going to change the arrow to a filled arrow and change the color of the fill to red. More information about dimensions and their uses will be discussed in other videos.